past came calling. The soft hum of jazz filled the room as Claire swirled the wine in her glass, her gaze lingering on the flicker of the candlelight. Across from her sat Michael, her husband of 12 years, engrossed in his phone. It wasn't uncommon for their evenings to pass this way, quiet, predictable, and comfortable. But tonight felt different, an unfamiliar weight pressing on Claire's chest. Her mind wandered back to the text message she had received earlier that day. "It's been a while, Claire. Let's meet. I'll be in town tomorrow. Daniel. The name rolled through her thoughts like a forbidden melody. He had been her first love, the kind of passion that burned so brightly it left scars when it fizzled out. That was over 15 years ago, long before she met Michael. But here he was, reaching out from the past like a ghost haunting her present. Claire told herself it was innocent, just a coffee, just catching up. Michael didn't need to know. Yet as she sat across from him now, her stomach twisted with guilt. She finished her wine in a single gulp, the liquid warmth doing little to calm her nerves. The following afternoon, Claire found herself sitting in a small cafe on the edge of town. She had chosen a place far enough from her usual haunts, where no familiar eyes could recognize her. The door chimed, and she turned to see Daniel walk in. Time had been kind to him. He still carried that confident charm that had once swept her off her feet. Their conversation flowed easily, laughter spilling between them as they reminisced about their youth. But beneath the surface, there was an unspoken tension, a magnetic pull that Claire tried to ignore. As the hours passed, the line between past and present blurred. When Daniel reached across the table to touch her hand, she didn't pull away. One meeting turned into 2, then 3. Each time, Claire promised herself it would be the last. But the thrill was intoxicating, a stark contrast to the quiet stability of her marriage. She convinced herself she wasn't doing anything wrong. After all, there had been no physical betrayal. Yet the lies she told Michael grew heavier with each passing day. One evening, Michael came home earlier than expected. Claire was in the kitchen, texting Daniel, her face lit with a guilty smile. She didn't hear Michael approach until it was too late. "Who's making you smile like that?" he asked, his voice light but curious. Claire froze, her thumb hovering over the screen. "Just an old friend," she said, too quickly. Michael's eyes darkened. What kind of friend? In that moment, the weight of her choices came crashing down. She could see the cracks forming, the trust they had built over a decade fracturing with every second of silence. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. The past had come calling, and Claire realized too late that answering it might cost her everything. Michael's gaze didn't waver. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness that told her he wasn't blind to her evasions. Claire felt her knees buckle as his words sank into her, and she tried desperately to think of a way out. It's nothing," she whispered, trying to sound casual. "Just someone from years ago. No big deal." But the unease in his voice lingered. Michael had always been the kind of man who could sense when something was wrong, even when Claire thought she was being careful. His stare felt like an interrogation, but worse, it felt like betrayal on its own. "Nothing? Claire, you're acting like you've got secrets you're trying to hide. If something's going on, just tell me," he said, his tone softening but still filled with suspicion. Her hands trembled as she set her phone down on the counter. She could feel the words clawing at her throat, ready to spill, but the shame, the fear, made it impossible to utter them. She turned toward the kitchen sink, focusing on the stream of water, desperately trying to gather herself. "I have nothing to hide, Michael," she said, her voice strained. But he didn't believe her. The next few days felt like they were punctuated by nothing but half-looks and tense silences. Claire would catch Michael staring at her during dinner, his brow furrowed, and she would find herself shrinking under his gaze, her conscience tearing at her. She tried to shake off the feeling that she was trapped, caught in a lie that would soon come to light. It wasn't long before her phone buzzed again. A text from Daniel saying, "Asterisk, can't wait to see you again, Claire." You've always been unforgettable. Asterisk. She stared at the words, her heart sinking. Each time she received a message from him, she felt a rush of longing, a whisper of temptation. But now the guilt lingered heavier than ever. What was she doing? She knew this couldn't go on. The following Sunday, Michael suggested they take a walk in the park, trying to reconnect and shake off the tension. Claire agreed, but the weight in her chest didn't lighten. They walked hand in hand, the sound of children laughing in the distance, the scent of fresh grass, and yet Claire felt as though she were walking beside a stranger. I've been thinking, Michael began as they paused by a bench, about how far we've come, how long we've been together. Claire, I know you've been distant lately, and I love you enough to ask, is there something wrong? His words came so suddenly, she almost gasped. She tried to stay composed, but the knot in her stomach had tightened beyond her ability to control. I don't know what you mean, she murmured, her voice weak, knowing it wasn't enough. He looked at her for what felt like hours. His eyes were searching, piercing through her like a dagger. I know something's been off. Maybe you can't trust me enough to tell me, but if you have doubts, secrets, or anything, please, Claire, be honest with me. And just like that, the dam broke. The weight of the past, the weight of her decisions, came rushing to the surface. Claire looked away, unable to meet his gaze. She knew that honesty was inevitable, that in trying to keep her secrets buried, she had made everything worse. But then, before she could say anything, Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced down at it and frowned. Wait, what's this? Claire froze. Her blood ran cold as he picked up his phone and stared at the screen. She recognized the name, the contact. It was Daniel. What is this number? Michael asked, turning toward her. His voice was sharp now, commanding. Her face turned white as she struggled to find words. She could feel the walls caving in. Michael, wait. She tried to speak, but he cut her off. Claire, answer me. Who is Daniel? She couldn't escape the truth anymore. Her voice came in trembling whispers as the words spilled out. It's an old friend, Michael. I didn't want you to know, but I've been seeing him. The words stung as they left her mouth, and for a moment, silence enveloped them. Michael's expression was unreadable, his jaw tense, his shoulders rigid. The air felt colder. You've been seeing him? Michael repeated, each word like a hammer. His voice was steady, but the hurt was there. Claire nodded, unable to speak. Her voice felt dry, hollow. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears finally escaping her eyes. It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't know how to stop. Michael stared at her, struggling to comprehend, and Claire could feel him pulling away. She knew that trust was fragile, and that what she had done had fractured everything between them. The future she had built with him was slipping through her fingers. Claire, I don't even know who you are anymore, he said quietly, his voice cracking. I thought I knew you. I thought I trusted you. And with that, he turned away, walking toward the path, leaving her standing by the bench in the cold breeze. She tried to follow him, to reach for his hand, but he wouldn't turn back. Every step he took felt final, like the end of a chapter she could never rewrite. She could feel her heart breaking as the distance between them grew. The past had come calling, and now it was too late. Claire stood alone in the park, the wind tugging at her hair, her heart pounding in her chest. She could still hear Michael's voice, his words slicing through her like a blade. Asterisk, I don't even know who you are anymore. Asterisk. Her hands trembled as she wiped her tears away. She knew she couldn't undo what had already been done. The trust had been shattered, and no amount of apologies could fix it. She walked back toward their house, her feet heavy, every step a reminder of her mistakes. Michael was waiting, somewhere in that space they used to call home. But when she opened the door, the house felt cold, empty, a reflection of the weight in her chest. She would try to make things right, somehow, but deep down, she knew the past had changed everything days past, but the silence between them remained unbroken. Claire tried to find the right words, but every attempt felt hollow, every apology fell short. Michael was distant, his warmth gone, replaced by an unspoken wall of hurt. Late one evening, she found herself staring at their wedding photo on the mantel. Two smiling faces, a promise of forever, but forever felt like it was slipping through her fingers. One evening, as she sat alone in the living room, Michael's voice broke the quiet. "I need time, Claire." It wasn't an accusation, just exhaustion. She nodded, unable to answer, and so they waited, both unsure if time would ever lead them back to each other. Weeks turned into months. The house grew colder with each passing day, the laughter that used to fill its walls now a distant memory. Claire tried to stay busy, cleaning, cooking, occupying her mind with mundane tasks, but nothing could fill the void. Michael rarely spoke, and when he did, his words felt strained, as though every syllable cost him effort. The space between them was vast, a chasm of regret, unspoken pain, and broken trust. Claire wondered if they would ever find a way back to each other, or if this was the beginning of their end. One rainy afternoon, as Claire stared out the window at the gray sky, she thought of Daniel again. She wondered if his messages had ever truly mattered, or if they had only been a distraction from the life she already had. But now, distractions felt empty. The question lingered. Could a mistake, no matter how deep, ever truly be forgiven? The answer remained a elusive point one evening. As Claire sat alone at the kitchen table, she heard Michael's footsteps approaching. Her heart leapt, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low, hesitant. She looked up, her breath caught in her throat. "About us," he continued, "and about what happened. I can't promise that everything can go back to how it was. Trust isn't something that can be fixed overnight." Claire felt her chest tighten. "I know," she whispered. He paused, staring at the floor. "But I think I want to try. Not because it's easy, but because I love you. Even though you broke me, there's a part of me that still believes in us." Hope flickered in her heart. "Michael, but it will take time, Claire. Real time. And I can't pretend I'm not hurt." She nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. She knew this wouldn't be easy, and she knew there would be days of doubt and pain. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of possibility. "I'll do whatever it takes," she promised, her voice steady. They stayed in silence for a moment, the sound of the rain tapping gently against the window. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a beginning. The road ahead would be long, but at least they were walking it together. The days that followed were slow and deliberate. Claire took every moment as a lesson, every small gesture as a way to prove herself. She would leave Michael his favorite notes on the kitchen table, prepare his favorite meals, and listen more intently when he spoke, no matter how small the conversation. It was far from easy. Some nights, she would catch Michael staring at her, his expression unreadable, his heart still guarded. Some mornings, he would avoid her eyes altogether, but she stayed. Every small attempt was a step forward, even if it felt like she wasn't getting anywhere. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Michael spoke again. "Do you remember when we used to sit here and dream about our future? We'd talk about family, careers, vacations." Claire nodded, her voice soft. "I do." "Well," he continued, "I think we can start dreaming again. One small step at a time." The words weren't grand promises or sweeping declarations, but they felt real, hopeful. Claire looked at him and saw the faintest glimmer of the man she had fallen in love with. "We have a long road ahead," she said. Michael gave her a small, hesitant smile. "Yeah, but I think it's worth walking." And for the first time in months, Claire believed it too. They didn't fix everything overnight, and they knew the journey wouldn't be perfect. But healing had begun. They would learn to rebuild trust, piece by piece, and maybe, just maybe, they would find their way back to each other over time. Their days became a delicate balance of patience, understanding, and small gestures of kindness. They didn't attempt to force a return to the way things used to be. Instead, they focused on rebuilding something new, step by step. Claire learned to be transparent, to share her fears and struggles without holding back, while Michael worked on letting go of the resentment that had kept him at arm's length. They began going on walks together again, short ones at first, and then longer ones as they grew comfortable. They would stop at their favorite spots: the small bakery on the corner, the old oak tree in the park, the neighborhood streets lined with glowing streetlights. Some nights, they would share wine and laughter, simple moments that felt unfamiliar but comforting. One evening, as they sat on the couch after dinner, Michael looked at Claire and said, "You know, I used to think that if trust was broken, it could never be rebuilt. But maybe healing is just learning to take small chances again." Claire looked into his eyes, surprised by the depth of his words. "Small chances?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he said, his voice steady. "One moment at a time." Claire felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it wasn't one of pain. It was a tear of hope, of recognition. She took his hand in hers, steady and warm. "Then let's take those small chances together," she whispered. And so they did. One moment at a time, they chose to trust again. The road was still long, and there would always be hurdles to face, but they chose to believe in the possibility of change, growth, and love. They weren't perfect, but they were trying. And sometimes, trying was enough that as the weeks turned into months, the rhythm of their lives began to feel more stable. It wasn't about pretending the past hadn't happened or erasing the mistakes they had made. It was about learning to face each new day with acceptance, vulnerability, and care. Claire began to notice the little things. Michael laughing at a movie they used to watch together, the way he would hum as he made his morning coffee, the small smile he would give her when their hands accidentally brushed. These were the reminders that healing was happening, not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments, in shared glances, and in the effort to simply be. One Friday evening, they sat together on the porch swing in the cool breeze. Claire rested her head on Michael's shoulder, her heart feeling lighter than it had in months. "I know we're not there yet," she murmured, her voice soft. "But it feels better, doesn't it?" Michael wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "Yeah," he said simply. "It does." They didn't need to define the journey, nor did they need to predict the future. They had learned that sometimes healing wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, being present, and giving each other the time and space to find their way. For the first time in a long time, they didn't have to look for answers. The path ahead felt uncertain, but they were walking it together, one step, one moment at a time. And that was enough. The days continued to unfold in small, quiet ways. Each morning a fresh reminder of the work ahead, each evening a chance to come closer to understanding. Their relationship felt different now, more intentional, like a fragile yet sturdy structure they were building with care. They still had their disagreements, moments of doubt, and sometimes old fears crept into their thoughts, but they learned how to approach each other without walls, without defensiveness. Claire found herself rediscovering things about Michael she had forgotten in the rush of life. The way he always remembered small details about the people he cared about. The way his voice would drop low when he spoke about his dreams. The way his laughter came from his gut, honest and unguarded. She fell in love with him again in these quiet moments, in the steady warmth of his presence. Michael, too, found himself learning more about Claire. She was stronger than he had given her credit for, and her heart was wide enough to love him even in the face of failure, fear, and mistakes. He saw her effort, her vulnerability, and how deeply she longed to make things right, not just for herself, but for them. One afternoon, as they were cleaning out their garage together, Claire stumbled upon an old box of keepsakes, letters, photographs, ticket stubs, and other trinkets they had collected over the years. The sight of them brought back memories, the good and the bad, but what struck her most was how much of their lives they had built together. There were moments of joy, milestones, trips they had taken, and the simple everyday things that, in the end, made up the story of their life. "Look at this," Claire said, holding up a photo of them on their first anniversary, smiling and sun-kissed at the beach. Michael came over, brushing dust off his hands, and took it from her. His expression was thoughtful as he looked at it. "We've been through so much, haven't we?" Claire nodded, her eyes reflecting the golden glow of the afternoon sun. "We have, but we're still here." "Yeah," Michael said, his voice soft. "And we've got each other. That counts for something." They stood there for a moment, the sound of birds chirping in the distance, the smell of freshly cut grass, and old wood filling the air. It felt like the world was giving them space to just breathe, to accept the present without rushing into the next thing. Later that week, they decided to take a trip together. Nothing extravagant, just a small road trip to visit nearby towns, see new sights, and reconnect with each other away from the weight of their routines. They explored small cafes, walked through antique shops, and spent quiet evenings in cozy motels. It was during these moments, away from their own lives, that they found a new kind of peace. On the third day of their trip, they drove out to a lake on the edge of a nearby forest. The water glistened under the pale blue sky, reflecting the trees around its edges like a mirror. Michael parked the car, and they sat for a while on the dock, their feet dangling over the water. "I've been scared for a long time," Claire admitted, staring out at the rippling surface. "Scared that I ruined everything, that we'd never find our way back." Michael took her hand, his voice steady and calm. "We can't change the past, Claire, but we can choose how we move forward. Every small choice we make, every moment we take to listen, to understand, it adds up." She turned to look at him, his gaze steady and kind. "You still believe in us?" He nodded. "I do. Not because it's easy, but because I know you, Claire. I know the strength in you. I know how much you care." Claire let out a shaky breath, tears threatening to come again. "I'll keep trying," she promised. Michael smiled, a small, real smile. "I know you will." They sat there in silence, the sound of the lake lapping at the wooden dock, the wind carrying the scent of pine and water toward them. For the first time in what felt like forever, Claire let herself feel the full weight of hope. It wasn't a grand resolution, nor did it erase their struggles, but it was enough. They had come so far, and there was still so much ahead. The journey wasn't over. There would be days when it would feel too hard, when doubts would return, and when old patterns would try to creep in. But in that moment, sitting on the dock with Michael by her side, Claire believed that they could handle it, because love wasn't about perfection or never failing. It was about showing up, about choosing each other in every moment, even when it was hard. And they chose each other. The days that followed their trip felt different, lighter. Somehow, Claire and Michael found themselves communicating in ways they hadn't before, talking about their dreams, their fears, and even the small, silly things that came to their minds. They would share what they wanted for their future without judgment, without fear, just two people learning how to trust one another again. They started to build new routines, things that felt simple but meaningful. Friday movie nights became sacred. Saturday mornings were reserved for long walks, and Sunday evenings became an opportunity to try new recipes in the kitchen together. Their days weren't defined by perfection, but by effort, by kindness, and by the willingness to show up for one another, no matter how small the gesture. One evening, as they sat in their living room, Claire brought up something that had been on her mind for weeks. She had been avoiding it, uncertain about how Michael would react, but she knew that honesty had to come first if they were truly moving forward together. "I think we should try counseling," she said, her voice careful but resolute. Michael looked up from the newspaper he had been reading, surprised. "Counseling? Yes," she said, her hands nervously playing with the edge of her sweater. "I think we've come so far, but it might help to have someone to guide us through the process, to help us learn how to let go of old patterns, how to communicate better, how to heal." Michael stared at her for a moment, his brow furrowed. Then he set the paper down, his voice thoughtful. "I never thought I'd consider it," he admitted. "But maybe you're right." Claire took a deep breath. relief washing over her that he didn't shut her down. "It's just a suggestion, Michael. I love you, and I want us to keep learning. I want to make sure we're okay, no matter what." He studied her for a moment, his expression softening. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's try." It wasn't a magic fix, but it was a step. They found a therapist who specialized in couples counseling and began their journey with a mixture of nervousness and hope. Sitting across from someone who could provide guidance felt foreign at first, but soon they found it liberating. They learned the value of having a neutral space to speak honestly without judgment. Through their sessions, they learned so much about themselves. Claire discovered how fear and insecurity had often dictated her decisions, while Michael learned how his silence had sometimes created distance instead of understanding. The process wasn't always easy, but they grew stronger with each session. They learned to listen more, to ask questions, and to find compassion in moments of frustration. Their relationship began to feel less like a fragile house of cards and more like a sturdy bridge. Continue next episode coming soon.